Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yeah,
Who's ready for the weekend this weekend?
yes, yes, I am.
We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to join. And Hector's already got us started off to a good start here. Name an organization's name in the chat for roll call. Thank you, Hector, for kicking things off. And we'll go ahead and get started at, I'll say 3 after. And Emily, if you're comfortable, you can advance maybe 1 or 2 slides. I can't believe it's August already. So welcome back to our monthly collaborative meeting. We did cancel on Monday because of the weather. We weren't sure how things were going to shake out. We are hearing from some that things went better than expected. So hopefully that's the case and the sun is shining on your side of the country. The sun is finally shining here today. It's been completely gloom and doom, and it feels like a very, very fall, almost winter day. So hopefully it's warmer where you're at. Name and organization name in the chat. If you're just joining us, we'll get started at 3 after. As a general reminder, we do record these sessions. We also post that recording and any supporting materials on our website. And Emily also sends them through the regular Slack channel. So you have reference to all of the meetings, post meetings in that standing Slack channel as well. All right, we've got a pretty stacked agenda today. So I see folks are still trickling in. I'm gonna just start recording this, but name and organization name in the chat if you're just joining. Happy Friday, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. We'll talk a little bit about July and the beginning of August. We'll do a little bit of a refresh, some of the different things that we've created as far as content. Do we want to keep them and maintain them? We'll also talk a little bit more about some of the data that's been published by the state and some additional information that we've got, received from the county or from the managed care plans in the county. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to split into 2 groups today, not our regular 4, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we'll keep things moving forward. And then at the end of the session today, so for those of you that have registered for the managed care plan office hours, we'll give you some instructions at the end of today's session for how to then transfer over to the managed care plan office hours. And hopefully you all can give us some feedback on today's session and on today's first go around of our managed care plan office hours. Okay. All right, let's keep moving forward. One thing that you may or may not have done, and if you haven't, please definitely either via email or we can reshare the surveys out in the Slack channel. We had our first CalAIM Curious session, just a general refresh. That session was really about learning about the managed care plans, enhanced care management, and community support service offerings. There, from a high level, their network or contracting requirements, some contracting aspects through the state of California. What do you need to do in order to be ready to contract with a managed care plan, et cetera. So that was a really high level. It's meant for organizations that are not yet contracted or maybe entertaining or looking at contracting with maybe new managed care plans that they haven't historically been connected to previously. The next session we had was a CalAIM Lunch and Learn, and that was meant to be more from the managed care plans, spending some time presenting their enhanced care management and community supports referral processes, so referral and authorization by managed care plan. And so we spent the time kind of talking a little bit more about some of the state changes for 2024, and then we handed things over to each of the managed care plans to talk about their processes around referrals and authorizations. So those are the two that we've done thus far. They're set to repeat, so same sessions with any addition based on feedback that we've been given through those surveys. They're set to repeat next month. So it will be, again, the CalAIM Curious, again, with any additional feedback that we have received thus far, then the Lunch and Learn thereafter. And then today, which is our first go around of our office hours. So that's just a quick sort of refresh and recap. This is a slide we have it on every single one of our presentations. We finally changed the coloring so that we didn't have to continue to look at it the way that it was before. Kidding, it's a lot of content on a page, but it really helps sort of recenter us to some extent outside of our aim. Why are we here? At the end of the day, the work that we all have been doing for so long and transitioned from whole person care pilots to the execution of CalAIM and supporting the Medi-Cal patient and client population to really advance the Medi-Cal service offering by supporting it through CalAIM and recognizing, obviously, some of the statistics in the state of California, right? Over 14 million Californians, 1 in 3, rely on Medi-Cal programming for, I'm ready for a TV show, rely on Medi-Cal for health coverage. So it's a staggering statistic when we think about it, but it really shows the impact of every aspect of the work that we do. So, you know, even though we never make it far enough, fast enough, the work that you all do, obviously on a day-to-day basis, has a real impact on a vast number of people. And so sort of just recognizing that, and now we'll get into some of the updates and some of the updates for San Diego and some of the updates for DHCS and the data that they've shared with us publicly. Okay, I feel like I'm talking fast. Sorry for talking at you all. I don't love talking at you all for an hour, so hopefully I'll be quick about it and then we'll get into more engaged discussion. Save the dates. I can't believe we're finally saying this. I know we've been wanting to do it for far too long. We finally have a date scheduled for our first in-person. And so we want to ask you guys a couple of questions. So if you haven't already clicked on the poll link, Emily will share it again in chat. Please click that. We're going to ask you some questions and your answers are going to help shape the in-person. So it's the same day as our regularly scheduled monthly meeting. We're extending the time and we've solidified a location. What else have we agreed on? Nothing. We know we will feed you. What we will feed you, I don't know, but we know that we will feed you. We found kind of a cool space. I hope that it is as cool as it looks and it lives up to. We chose it for a couple of different reasons, being cognizant of COVID and the season that we're starting to get into. It has a series of garage doors, will be open, and it will be ventilated. So thinking about it being a big enough space to host all of us, but also being cognizant of some of those other things. So I hope, fingers crossed, that it is as promising as it looks. But we have a date and we have a location. We also have a formal registration. Why? We already know who you all are. Why are we asking you to fill out yet something else? I am so sorry, but we want to be able to have enough food for you all. And part of having enough food for you all is knowing how many people plan to attend. So we will send that through a registration. It's just a Google sheet, so it should be fairly easy to complete, and it will make sure that we have an accurate head count, so that we have the necessary provisions for those in attendance. And I think Emily also has a registration link for that, but we'll send it out in addition to the other materials that we send out from today's session. Okay, first question, I'm putting you on the spot here. So if you don't have an answer to the question, and Emily, let me know if it's problematic. If you don't have an answer to the question now, that's okay. Definitely, you guys can reach out at a later date, either through Slack or through email, and let me know your thoughts. But the first of the questions is, what do you hope to accomplish in our first ever in-person meeting? And so the way that this will work is that you can vote on other people's ideas. So you can enter in your own idea, and if somebody enters in an idea that you like, you can select it and give it a second vote. So I'm going to stop talking and have a sip of my water here, and I'm going to let you guys take a couple of minutes and think a little bit more on what you might be interested in. What does success look like at the end of this session? Networking and speed dating? I mean, we can have some fun with that, guys. Yeah, face to face, absolutely. We're a pretty big group. It's going to be, I think, really interesting for us all to get together. We have a couple of ideas of some things that we would like to do outside of general networking. As things come to you all, please let us know. We're going to ask you a little bit more in a granular way about topics. So in addition to what you're hoping to accomplish, are there any specific topics you're hoping we cover? Again, same concept, you can vote on the ideas that others have submitted. No topics. No way.
That's not necessarily true. I just couldn't find where to put the topic.
You know what, Robert?
Does it go in the chat?
You can put it in the chat if you can't get that link to work for you. We have a little interactive poll that we use, which will automatically display on the page as you enter it. But if for whatever reason, Robert, you can't get that to work for you, please definitely. Yeah, that's a good one, Hector. Populations of focus, children, and as we look to 2024 for justice involved as well. Racial disparities is a good one. Wow. Okay. Now I'm seeing progress. This is good. This is good. We'll give it another minute. Thank you for that, Heather. You know what? Maybe what we could do is add that in the follow-up email, if there's anybody there specific to that population of focus. And maybe we could do the same, Lynn, for the group that you and James co-chair for justice involved. And then Christy, anything that's not showing up there on the page, you can either shoot that to me over in a private chat or write in the chat so that we don't lose it to follow up. All right, I'm going to keep things moving along. I think we've got one more question. The last, I think, question of the day is, if we have one of you all present or somebody in the community who maybe isn't a participant, is there any organization that you'd like to hear from or that you'd like to learn more about? Same style, you can vote on other things that people select. And we'll give this another 2 minutes. Lived experience advisors, not sure who put that, but whoever put that, if you want to follow up with me after today's session, either privately on Slack or through email, I would love to explore that a little bit more as well. Best practices for schools. Yeah. I love it. Janet, you have to cancel your vacation.
I don't think so. I'll be thinking of you. I promise.
So now we all want to know, where are you going on vacation? I mean,
India.
I want.
India.
That is awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful time. I can't wait to hear about it when you return. I've never been, always wanted to go. I used to work with my chief information officer, so that the other side of the house technology from when I was in health information exchange. And he and I were partners in crime, and he would say to me, "It is far too hot in India for you. You would never survive."
Oh, it's hot. Yes. Well, it depends where you go, but yeah, so it's very hot where we're going.
Yeah, he's from southern India. So
Yep. Yeah. That's my husband's from there. That Vaticancheri, that weird name that's his name. So
I love it. I love it. It was when I first learned how much I loved Indian food.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Hey, how do we, I like the school thing? How do I click the check mark? Like, how do I say school? Some of these are good.
you can click on, you should be able to select any a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Oh. In the link, maybe. I'm not able to. Oh, I see. Okay, thanks. Oh, okay.
And then that stays up for you guys for a little bit. So we'll pull that information down. And we'll use that to kind of help shape the rest of the agenda for the 22nd. And then what we'll do, Janet, since you won't be in attendance, it won't be as easy to do a recording of an in-person, but we'll try and put together something a little bit more robust than general meeting minutes, but it'll give you the overall gist of the session. And then we'll also ask folks, you know, if we were to look out to 2024, what would in-persons look like in the best version of our collaborative? And so that would be, something that we would be really interested in hearing from you all as well. Okay, so I'll keep things moving along here. And as I move forward, the next thing that we'll talk a little bit about, and feel free to take yourself off of mute. I'm assuming that this will be the beginning of an engaged discussion, and we'll probably continue this on more in person. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that I'd like to do as well for the collaborative, and you can let us know how you feel. DHCS has published, right, their ECM and community supports data. They just updated it with a few PDFs. I don't know if anybody's recently been out there, but initially they shared with you all these things that they're calling story maps, where you can go in and similar fashion to many other types of population health data, and do filters and overlays, right? So you can say, I'm looking for this information, and that information, and you should be able to, on a visual, pull that information together in a view that makes sense to you. I assume that it didn't necessarily get to everybody what they needed, and they heard some feedback maybe of what folks were really interested in. And so there are 2 PDFs, we'll also send them along, which break down by county the information that we've been talking about for baseline for the last 8+ months. So if you haven't already had a chance to go out there, I encourage you to do so. I've got a few inquiries in about the story maps in general. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get you guys some additional information on tutorials? Maybe there's other types of queries that make sense for those story maps. Maybe there's something that we can work on together in the county to start to look at some additional data elements that might make more sense for us as well. So we'll share with you all that information. Also, there is a cheat sheet. We talked a little bit about this before. The cheat sheet is 42 pages. So I get it. It's too much for me. It's a lot of content. There is a vast majority of the ECM policy guide and the community supports policy guide that is really helpful and informative. For those of you who weren't here last month, we tried to condense them down and highlight some of the more specific changes based on things that we've been talking about. And those are in last month's deck. So if you want really just in like 2 pages or less, there's some helpful information there. We'll also try to, and we have been working on a way to kind of condense that cheat sheet and some of the information in the policy guides further and create sort of a Cliff Notes version, if you will, and put that on our sort of resource page on our website. So hopefully we'll have that over to you all as well. These are links on the page. Again, we'll send all of this out to you after the session today as well. And so before I get into some of the other data that we have, I want to sort of pause here and see if anybody has any general thoughts, feedback, if they've had a chance to get into some of this data, if there's something that you wish that you saw from a visualization standpoint in a different way. So just general comments. And I see a couple of hands raised. Joe, your hand is raised.
Hi, Denise. Thanks so much. Yeah, I had a question. This is really great news, particularly in terms of the baseline and kind of where we're headed. And I know that a key like San Diego Path Collaborative goal is to achieve, like, I think it's a 10% increase by December 31st of, is it 2023 or 2024?
Yep, 2023.
Okay, by 2023. So that kind of prompted the question for me, okay, if you're shooting for a 10% increase, you'd want to know what the baseline is so that you know that you've got the 10% increase. So I was just curious, are we going to be talking at some point in time about, hey, this is the San Diego County baseline for ECM and for community supports. And, oh, this is the increase that we've achieved, you know, in 2023.
This couldn't have happened better if I paid you, Joe. That is
You
exactly.
did pay me. Thank you.
That is exactly what we're going to talk about. And, you know, it's funny that you brought it up too, because for those of you that are active on the Slack channel, Jack as well, call out to Jack Daly, also shared, you know, some questions around that baseline once some of this information was posted by DHCS as well. So absolutely, we're going to talk about it. We're going to start the conversation actually today.
Oh,
And I assume that we're going to continue the conversation in more detail in the in-person as well.
how great. Thanks so much. I know that everybody will really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I see that there's another hand raised. And so let me call on Janet really quick.
Oh, I put it down. Just a comment, I downloaded the Excel documents just for the regions where our health centers, so that's San Diego, Riverside, and Imperial County. And just real quick looking, that's probably not material, but if you add the numbers up, for example, for San Diego, for, you know, quarter, and it's cumulative, but Q4 ending received community supports by health plan, you add all those numbers up, it comes to 1,549, but DHCS is displaying 1,518. So the sum of the totals adds up to 29 more than what they're showing on the report. So maybe there's a reason for that. And then I guess just also kudos to Molina. They don't have, I think they're maybe, of course, number 2 in the market, but they have, of this data for calendar year 2022, they authorized almost 50% of the community support services in our county. So I think that should be recognized.
Well, thank you for that, Janet. I'll say to you this, I'll second that for Molina, but I'll also add that all of the managed care plans in San Diego made a commitment to share their data quarterly with us versus what you see on the page here from DHCS. So the DHCS is here, and oh, by the way, they are sending this data quarterly to DHCS, but they are and have been, and maybe some of the reservations behind not sharing it sooner is because there are some discrepancies in some of what you see at DHCS versus what you see based on the managed care plans themselves. And so we've added a few more slides to this deck, which will show you sort of our initial representation of data directly from the managed care plans. And so we'll continue to also work with them, Janet, in order to display the information. The other thing that I'll sort of say is that by continuing that work with the managed care plans directly, we'll also be able to share information sooner, given the significant lag behind some of the data that you're seeing in DHCS. Or on DHCS's website. So I'm hopeful that just, you know, in general, and we'll talk about that more, I think, in the next, 2 or 3 slides, but thank you for that, acknowledging that there's some anomalies there, and that we'll get into some of the data that we got directly from the managed care plans as well. Okay, so any other comments or shares based on what you all have seen or spent some time with from what was shared through DHCS? Joe?
Hi, Denise. This may be a little off target here, but I did want to mention it to you that, so as you know, the Food is Medicine work group's been meeting and having some great discussions and kind of like, okay, well, what would the group like to do moving forward? And one of those things that came up was that, hey, would it be helpful? We're thinking about possibly putting together a survey for the managed care plans in terms of what would be helpful for them in terms of achieving these California Department of Healthcare Services goals in terms of ECM and community supports. And so I just wanted to throw it out there, let you know that that's kind of percolating for the work group. And if there was an opportunity to either leverage something that's already been done or kind of support some thinking that's already kind of going there, we would love to do that in terms of, okay, how could we as community-based organizations, as community health workers, how could we support that CS and the ECM process?
And that's I think that's also a good thing to talk about a little bit more too, Joe. And I'm curious, I have, I think in the next slide here, a question to you all about the resources that we're using to communicate with one another. So Emily, can you advance, I think it's one slide or maybe it's two, one more. Okay, perfect landing place. So Joe, to your comment, you know, we've started working on some of these different things, right? We've got these Slack channels, and we can build one out for the food as medicine work group as well. I wonder if there's more we can do to get you some of that feedback sooner and more at, you know, individuals, you know, pace. Is Slack easy or hard? Is it working for you or not? And I know that these monthly meetings are great, but also recognizing that you also, you know, you guys have, you know, a jam-packed month with a slew of other priorities and deliverables. And so how can we, you know, look at, you know, different ways of communicating, different resources, and you know, increase the level of engagement outside of these monthly meetings, while still being, you know, cognizant of the fact that everybody has got, you know, 90 million other priorities as well. I bring that up, Joe, because I would love to see that go on as a question via the Slack channel, you know, and call out maybe some of your friends in the community supports space, some of the providers, and just to kind of hear from them, you know, as they're experiencing different things. So it doesn't have to be right now, folks, but I want to just kind of remind you of some of the materials that are there for you, and we can, in our survey this month, include some additional questions, but we do keep that meeting material repository out on our website. But I don't know, I know that to some Box is an issue, so I'm curious if anybody, maybe show of hands, is finding that that's helpful if you have to go back to a previous month, or no, that is just not a helpful resource. Helpful, show of hands, thumbs up.
This is Janet, Denise. I think a couple of times I've tried to get into Slack, by the time there's a confirmation code that gets sent to the email. By the time the code gets through our security system these days, I think it's expired. So I've never been able to get in. Now I've only tried a couple of times, and maybe I need to try again, but I think it's just an issue with our filters. We have very strict scrubbing features. I can be delayed by as much as 20 minutes getting an email. So I'll go back and try again, but I don't know if anybody else is having that problem.
It sounds like maybe a few more. I wonder if, yeah, agreed, Jack. So maybe what we'll do is we'll ask you guys 2 or 3 questions specific to Slack, and maybe you all, if you have a recommendation on an alternate way of communicating, you can let us know as well. Mary, you have a comment.
Yeah, I'm actually on it right now, and it's got a lot of great information. I think the challenge for me, and I don't know if others can relate, I'm only speaking for myself, getting to it in between meetings is a challenge. It's just competing demands. And so I do find myself, when we have these meetings, jumping on and like, oh, great, I can access the slides from today. It looks like they're already there, or like the links to the policy updates are already there. I think it's a great resource. It's just the ability to go in is challenging outside of this meeting.
I think that's really helpful too. And there's also some different things that we might be able to do cheat sheet wise there as well. You know, if it's helpful, maybe we could think about how we use it better. And so when we're sending something or when we have a question, flagging it in a certain way. The other thing that we might be able to do is there's different things that you can do to set it up so that you don't necessarily even have to go to Slack, depending on those pesky firewalls. So we can share that with you as well. It can, you can set up certain things to come to you via email. And then you'll just see it in your email. You can read it, you can trash it, but if it's important enough and you want to follow up, it includes the link to bring you to it in Slack, so that you can then easily follow up with whatever's there. That's what I do, because it's, you know, I know probably for all of you, it's one more place to look for something. So recognizing that as well.
I think that's a great idea.
The other thing that we're going to ask you some additional questions about is Calium Academy. We did share some of the feedback that we have thus far with the managed care plans. We're going to be scheduling a status with them shortly to just talk about our first cycle through Calium Academy. If there's other topics that you'd like to see presented by the managed care plans and or us through Calium Academy, that would be really helpful as well. Google Sheets for activities and for directories, recognizing that Google also isn't necessarily an ultimately accessible for everybody. So, you know, perhaps looking at an alternate way of displaying that, or looking for a partner and or host, I don't know. But we do have some of our interactive work on Google Sheets. The other thing that we shared with everybody through Google Sheets is a community meeting directory. So early on, we talked about how many meetings are happening in the community, what are their charters, what is the frequency, who is the chair or co-chair, and if you are part of meetings, to add them or to share the information with us, and we will add them to this directory so that folks can see things that are already happening, so that if you are interested or in needing to join or ask one of these work groups a question, that you know a little bit about who they are and what they're doing. And also, if you're getting ready to potentially stand up a new work group, sort of looking at that list to go, is there something like this that already exists that I might be able to partner on, etc. So I don't know how widely that's used. So we'll ask you a couple of questions about that as well to see if there's something that might work better for you all, or if it's something that's just not helpful, that we should stand down. Last but not least, we will ask you a couple of questions about an issues log. We have been collecting data for a number of months, and we have some of it that we're tracking, and many of you all in your work groups are doing the same thing. Would it be helpful to you know, have sort of a central repository for some of those issues to be able to see them all in one place? And so we're going to ask you what you think of that as well. Okay, next slide, please. So more questions to come on that survey, but in the meantime, circling back, Joe, to what you said, and Jack, what you had shared in the Slack channel a few weeks back. We have this aim statement, and it does have a line in the sand, you know, something that we're really looking to accomplish by the end of the year. Why did we pick 10%? We didn't really know what to pick because we didn't have any baseline data to go off of. But we thought, I think early on, that 10% made some sense as far as where folks were experiencing services in general, and perhaps, you know, the opportunity to increase the number of ECM and community supports eligible individuals enrolled. And so we started with 10%. And so I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper to see if that makes sense. if that still makes sense for everybody. So I'm not going to go over, actually, Emily, can you go to the next slide? I'm not going to spend too much time on the next slide, but I think it's sort of just a reminder of the framework that we use. So for the aim statement, are you asking, Mary, for the aim statement? For the baseline, I think we should end at the end of 22.
Right.
And then to start, it would be from January to now. And then presumably we would be a quarter behind instead of what we have now with DHCS being, I think, 3 quarters behind. So with the managed care plans, working with them, we would probably be around a quarter behind as far as, you know, sort of temperature check. And so that's sort of where our thought was. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to keep it that way. The other thing that we have been using sort of behind the scenes is a diagram of our issues, priority issues. So starting at the very highest level with our aim statement, and then looking at different categories of activities, different priorities that we want to focus on, and then fleshing them out into further and further granularity. So I'm just displaying on the page here a visual of some of the work that we've been doing thus far in starting to really categorize different issues into priority topic areas, and then looking at change concepts that we may be able to apply a test to in order to impact the overall goal and the aim at the end of the day. And then we can come back to this, but it's a nice way to kind of say, here's where we started, big aim statement. Here's sort of the work as it kind of a visual of from the highest level of granularity to the sort of zoomed out version of where we are. So really thinking in those 5 categories or focus, and how we've been able to kind of drill down some of our breakout sessions to talk about these things in more detail. But I want to talk a little bit more about the data before we get into our breakouts. So Emily, can you go through to I think it's the next slide? And then Sokim, I know you're on the line as well. If you can look at, I think there's some questions that are coming through the chat. If you don't have the answer, that's fine. I'll swing back over to it. But go ahead, one more slide, Emily. Okay, so DHCS data, we talked a little bit about that. Now we're going to look at quarterly report data from the managed care plan. So a little bit of context on what you're going to see and also the data that's being displayed. And then where we're thinking about going from a quarterly standpoint moving forward. So again, some of the things that I said earlier with the managed care plans, working with them to share the data in this format. It's definitely not the same format that they share it with the state because it's not PHI or sensitive or identifiable information. So they work hard to kind of translate that information from how they share it with the state to how they share it with us. So a big thank you for that. I know it took a really long time to get there. And I know that all of you had to work internally with your, informatics team. So just sharing that it's not an easy thing. We are hearing that others are doing it in other counties and it's really working well. So we're really hopeful that we can start here and keep moving it forward as far as the quarterly data being displayed. So looking at the data itself, the first visual that we have, we're looking at the percentage enrolled in ECM, and then also the next slide will be community services. So we're looking at percentage enrolled that are eligible. So the numerator is the actual enrollment, and the denominator is the percentage eligible. So I'm just gonna let that sink in for a second. And if we kind of dig a little bit deeper on the percentage eligible, this is sort of something that's been, I think, a topic of conversation, at least in some of the, across the state. For the denominator, the eligibility data is based on an assumption that 5% of the Medi-Cal population is eligible for ECM and community supports services. So we made this assumption a few months back when we started to put together our measurement strategy. And we made it based on similar assumptions that other CPI collaboratives are making across the state. So it's been a topic of conversation with some of the other facilitators as well. And we are seeing that 5% seems to be a more widely adopted rationale behind that denominator. So that
Denise?
said, go ahead.
May I jump in with a question on that?
Sure.
And it looks like Mary may be asking the same question. I keep hearing you use the word assumption. I'm wondering if there is any data that assumption is based on, and whether it varies by plan, because for some plans, they may be tracking actual, eligible clients more directly by criteria.
So yes, I think that there is some data. So that the numerator is data, obviously, that we have. The denominator is, like I said, based on that assumption. And then I think what we're trying to do, based on some additional information that the managed care plans shared with us, was to look at, in addition to that, break it down by population of focus. So I think this is just a start of getting the data in front of you. So what we used for this visual was the Medi-Cal population data from the from that PDF document, Medi-Cal enrollment by plan. And then what we did was we used the last month of the quarter for that enrollment for that period. So what we did was we then calculated the number of lives that it would take for us to reach our goal based on that 10%. And the way that we have it here, again, without that solid denominator, is that we have an additional 2,541 lives to get to the goal that we had initially established of 10% increase. And so, Glenn, I think to answer your question is yes, I think that we can work with the managed care plans on that. I don't want to overcommit managed care plans. What I'll do though is ask them that information and see to what extent that information can be provided. And then look at ways that we can sort of advance this and expand on this future state. Right now we were super excited to get the data in the numerator. And then also, like I said, in addition to what you see here, also broken down by the populations of focus. So based on what's here, the idea is to expand on that piece of it further and to share that level of granularity with you all as well. And I see a hand up.
Yeah, Denise, it's Joe again. So I've heard different numbers in terms of the Medi-Cal population for San Diego County. Could you just give us a quick overview of like, you know, how many Medi-Cal lives we've got in San Diego County?
Yeah, let me just, I don't have the numbers in front of me, Joe, but we can share that. We can share that out. We do it, that is information that's available. And somebody else may have it off the top of their head. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I do know it's data that we have.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And it's data that I've seen in just some of the participation that I've had in other meetings at the county and in other places. So I think that's something that we should be able to get.
And
And
I'll,
again, go ahead, Soka.
yeah, and I just want to frame this by saying we were expecting a lot of questions and discussion around this data. And so the intent was to really simplify the information so that it could start a discussion about what baseline we want to start with, and also the time frame as well. So that's all for this group to decide upon. So if there are questions about the 5% and whether or not that is a good measure for San Diego, let's talk about it. And you know, the best place to do that is in the next meeting or the in-person meeting where we could think about what would make the most sense. The intent is we want to show success. So so we want perspectives from everyone to make sure that it's both accurate and also, you know, reflective of what's actually happening on the ground in San Diego, and also where we want to start from so that, you know, come 6 months from now, we're able to show progress over time. So this is not intended to say this is what it is and this is what we're sticking with and we're moving from here. It's really, it was just really a starting place, and it was simplified you know, intentionally for us to have this kind of conversation. So it looks like there is some discussion about wanting to verify what it actually looks like through the managed care plans. And as Denise was saying, you know, we'll work with the managed care plans to see what's feasible and then come up with a, you know, a different percentage if it makes more sense.
Wow, interesting.
And I see, Robert, your hand is up. I want to just pause for a quick second because Jack, I think you've made two really good comments in the chat here, and I just want to I want to A, acknowledge them, but B, I think that it's something worth talking about, and we can start, I think, the conversation here, and maybe even do some polling with you all, you know, after today's session as well. But Jack's question is a really good one, and it's one that we thought might come up a little bit today. If Jack, if you want to come off of mute, you're welcome to talk a little bit. I'll read it through.
Yeah, no worries. I think one, just looking at the growth rate data, not only in the DHCS data that was reported earlier, but also this more localized Q4 to Q1 data, which again, just want to second the appreciation for the plans for participating and being so transparent and collaborating. I think that's the kind of thing that will make this type of a collaborative work. So just want to give tons of appreciation there. But to me, it kind of demonstrates that our 10% growth goal may have been a bit conservative. I think through the natural growth of programs like these, people are going to hear more about it. And so perhaps we could be a little bit more aggressive with the growth rate. And also too, just, you know, we're almost in the last quarter of this year. It's coming up. And so tangible kind of impact from this effort is going to be really hard to, I mean, we may meet this goal just by sitting here and holding our hands on this call without doing anything. And I'm all for slapping ourselves on the back and saying good job, but I don't think that's what we want to do here. We want to make some targeted impact. So maybe reconsidering the timeline for which we are evaluating the impact of local efforts. And I'll also just add on one piece here. I think I didn't mention this earlier, but when you're identifying our concerns with the state data and issues for us to address, health equity and improving access to these services through an equity lens is built into the AIM project. And perhaps we can get a little bit more specific with those goals now that we have the data to back up where there are specific problems. I just want to highlight a couple of them. There's disproportionately low engagement or utilization by Hispanic and LEP populations generally for both ECM and community support services. So I think it's important that, as we look for tangible local impacts that we can make a dent on in terms of this improving access and utilization, that we maybe think about how we rework the AIM statement to be a little bit more specific. Maybe overall, the general increase of utilization is a little bit greater than 10% over a longer period of time, but maybe we get ambitious with our targeted subpopulations and say we want to get at least proportional representation of these subpopulations. Utilization of these important benefits and services. So just wanted to throw that out there as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Any reaction to what Jack's just described? So Jack, just to kind of let that sink in a little bit, I appreciate everything that you've just shared. I think it's something that that we've also been thinking about, right? Like how much of this is just natural progression versus us actually doing work to meet the aim. So I think, that's one thing. The other thing that you commented on around populations of focus and also other data elements. So as I started to get into those story maps, I tried to do some work with the overlays. I don't know if anybody else has, because some of that has some census information on it and some additional data as well, that helps us really get to some of the cross-sector or the cross-section of the data that we're talking about and the populations of focus that we're talking about, with some additional information at the census level, which I think is helpful. So I'm wondering, I may reach out to you, Jack, after today, and just maybe we can talk a little bit more in detail on what might be good things for us. Maybe I have a few that I would like to maybe display and share for the group to maybe kind of weigh in on. So I might reach out to you directly after today and see if we can kind of talk that through a little bit more, and then bring some additional information to the group. I know that there's stuff coming through the chat. I can read through that. Robert, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I just had a real quick question on the numbers that were put in, the 891,000. And so, my primary focus is the subpopulation of the justice involved and justice involved only, because that's my area of specialty. But I wanted to know, one, is the justice involved subpopulation being counted separate? And I'm asking that question because justice involved can actually include a couple of populations, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's homeless, or is the number
Yes.
off
Yep.
because of the different populations? And are the managed care plans counting the justice involved in their enrollment separately?
So I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I'll say that some of that data is in here, but I would say not the same way, Robert, that I'm assuming you're envisioning it. So it's not that this information, thank you, Stephanie, is not reported in the same way to DHCS yet, right? That's 2024, but presumably individuals that are experiencing or have been incarcerated may also be included in these numbers, right? So the reality is that these are still individual people at the end of the day. And I know we're looking at them, you know, in a numerical form, but that they're still individual people. So could there be individuals that still make up that same population? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think that we, at least not yet, have the data for you specific to that population of focus.
Well, thank you. I mean, you almost answered my question. I guess I'm going based on the fact that there are the original data that you spoke about was how much of the community support services have been utilized to date. And so that's where I'm leaning to. How many of those actually, if that data existed, are justice involved already? And the reason why I call it that rabbit hole is because when I look at the services, and I know the services are linked specifically to the client, the patient, a lot of the services may be impeded by the fact that the justice involved, when it starts off with housing, the justice involved for the first year or two of their release, or the ones that have already been released, they're living in temporary housing settings. So a lot of the community support services, they're following the individual, but they're not, I guess you would say, they don't have the aptitude to be utilized long-term for that individual because he's stuck in a temporary setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all really good points. And I think, you know, the hope and the intention is that we'll continue to get more granular. Heather, I see you have a hand up as well. I want to acknowledge that, but just really quick, Emily, for whatever reason, it's not letting me chat you directly. And so just an FYI, I know that we're at sort of our original time, but we really wanted to have this conversation today. So I think I'm okay with us continuing a little bit longer, and then we'll kind of see where we land. So Heather, with your hand up, why don't you come on off of mute?
So Denise, I just wanted to help clarify and address Robert's question, so that 891,000 number from August, that included everybody who was on Medi-Cal. So that's the entire county number holistically. So it absolutely could encapsulate anyone in any of the populations of focus. And then I'll just preface that in saying it's a snapshot in time. And I've heard Rick Wani talk from Self-Sufficiency Services. It's like the 405 freeway, right? The traffic on it at 8 a.m., at noon, and at 5. Denise, if you've not driven on it, it can get very gridlocked, and other times you're free flowing. So those numbers can change month to month. We've got a lot of efforts going on with redetermination and a big push in getting new folks enrolled, and an expansion in our managed Medi-Cal populations as far as ages, and opening up for 18 all the way up to infinity, and however old individuals are in the state of California for enrollment now, regardless of immigration status.
Thank you, Heather.
So lots of traction as well in the chat. I'll move, Emily, why don't you go to the next page as well, so we can look at community supports services. And again, the same sort of methodology. And then just from a math perspective, if you see that increase of 10% would have another 4,751 lives in order to get to the goal. And I'm saying that, but based on sort of the preface that's sort of where we started the conversation. I'm hearing both in the chat and based on some of the things that we've been talking about, that it makes some good sense for us to change things. And that ideally, you know, more data is always great. But recognizing too that as we continue to get the data that we have and more granular, we can still do work with some of the data that we have and continue to move things forward and increase granularity. I know the other thing that we've talked about as well is, how can we lean into and leverage the existing infrastructure in the region, both with the county and with the managed care plans and with the health information exchange and the community information exchange that exists in San Diego. What does additional population health data look like based on the infrastructure that exists today, in the county? So, just sort of prefacing that is also, a piece of the puzzle. Glenn, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to check and see, are these data, these counts based on current enrollment or cumulative enrollment?
So, and I didn't do these reports myself, so hold on one second. I have a little cheat sheet here of notes.
It seems to me like they would have to be cumulative, but that, because the expectation that we're going to constantly increase community supports may not necessarily be viable, given that many of them are one-time events, and many of them are expected to end at some predictable amount of time. So the expectation would not necessarily be that we continue serving more people, but that we cumulatively have served people.
Yeah, and the managed care plans do submit, and what we have here is current enrollment per quarter. So it would be, cumulative in that there would be those that are, it's sort of that snapshot in time kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So
it's not necessarily looking at sort of the unique individual specific to a service, but the snapshot in time.
So here I'm kind of curious about people's thoughts about that goal, the 10% increase, from the framework of having an increase suggests that we've increased capacity. So even though individual members come and go, it means that we're capable of serving more simultaneously if we're growing. So kind of back to Jack's points earlier, I think it says something about our system if we're able to continue to grow the quarterly enrollment numbers.
So Denise, I have a question, Joe again. So based on the numbers, if you're talking 5% of this, 891,000, we're talking about a total population that could be served of 44,592 folks. So if we're currently serving 932 of that 44,592, then we have a lot of room potentially to grow, because we're talking about like 2%. We're serving approximately 2% of the total population. So in terms of the growth over time, I'm certainly hoping that we can go beyond 2% in terms of the support that we're providing to the total eligible population, if it is indeed this 5%, which equates to 44,500 folks.
Any reactions to Joe's comment?
Yes, I have some reaction to it. Part of it is that we're lumping all community supports together here, which is confusing. Because housing deposits, everybody's not going to be eligible for it. Individual specific things, it may be a much smaller subset of that, of people who would actually even qualify for them or have need for them. So I really think with community supports, it would be meaningful to break it down and look at what's the population that's actually eligible for each community support and how much of that population are we serving. And I know that gets really granular, but I think in the absence of that, it's really hard to know who's even really eligible for the services that we're talking about.
I think that's an excellent statement. In addition to that, I think we need to also add the quality assurance on the the other end, that the services are being provided in a quality form where we know that each service or each support is actually working for the participant. We're not just putting a service there and saying we provided it, but we know that the service is working also.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother Pandora's box, Robert. So I'm not even going to comment on that one right yet. But I think, you know, that quality is obviously equally as important, if not more, to some of the data that we're talking about. I think it's a whole other aspect of the collaborative. I think data helps inform some of that to a certain degree, but there's other things that help inform quality as well. And so I don't disagree with anything that you're saying there with regard to quality, other than I think we definitely need to do some work here to get some additional granularity for you, Glenn, and for the rest of this group. I don't know that we'll have at least the level of granularity that you're looking at or that you're interested in, but I think we can bring it down. At least we can bring it down one more level by individual community support services. And so we might be able to look at this, by service in a little bit more detail, and also maybe by, subsets of services. So maybe it makes sense to look at a few services together or not, I don't know, but we can absolutely bring it down more granular than you're seeing it on this page. So that's at least a start to looking at. And then the other piece of that puzzle is the eligibility by service, which may be a little trickier, but I hear you as it being a critical piece of the puzzle. And then Rob, I haven't lost your comment on quality, and I think it's one that we can take as a takeaway and see if we can explore how we might engage in a quality conversation in a follow-up meeting.
Thank you. And the only reason I raised that issue is because of my population, the justice involved population, even though this is created in an equitable way, but for most individuals in that environment, they get one shot at this before there's a possibility of recidivism or relapse. And so that's why the quality of service is so crucial to, and the eligibility, of course, but for this population. And at the end of the day, all it means is that if they relapse, recidivate, they'll be back in the cycle all over again, which is definitely something that we don't want to do when we had them the very first time and could have fixed the problem or the situation or provided quality service.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a really good comment. It's partly why everybody's made a commitment to just even be here and part of the CPI collaborative. I think you've got an audience of super engaged people who have been working on these things in the community for a long time. And so I think what you're saying really resonates with everybody here. But I would say too, like, these are the folks, you've got the right folks at the table, Robert. These are the folks that are interested in quality and serving to the best of their ability the populations in the community that need it the most, and how we can continue to serve them better by looking at data, by looking at quality, by looking at issues, whether they're workflow issues or whether they're access issues, but absolutely all of the above. I'm going to keep us moving forward here in the sake of time. But what we'll do is we'll collect the feedback in the chat and the feedback from the minutes of today's conversation, and we'll look at providing this additional information in a more detailed way Jack, I'll also follow up with you. I've got a couple of things I'd like to think through, and I may just pick your brain on some of that in the next week or so. And then we'll work internally with our team to see if we can push out some additional reports to this group so that you all can provide some feedback. And we might do that through Slack in the absence of waiting a whole month until we meet again. For those that don't have Slack, we will try and also send them via email. It may be something that gets flagged through those same firewalls as well. And Cammie, I see you have a comment here or a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to be in the breakout rooms, but just looking relating to the ECM numbers, looking at some of the other counties, I think Contra Costa stood out as doing 300% increase to us. And I know that you guys are also working in there. Is there any insights you can share from your work in Contra Costa of why it's similar and different than what numbers we're seeing for ECM enrollments in particular?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's an incredibly different landscape in Contra Costa. You have a much more, I would say, tight network of providers. And so they all sort of nest for the most part. The largest population of them nests under a single sort of health system ecosystem, if you will. And you have, one payer having the majority of the Medi-Cal population enrolled and eligible. So there's a few other plans that exist in Contra Costa, but the landscape is completely different, right? The network is different, the population that they serve and who is contracted to serve them is completely different as well. And so it's almost like the conversation that we have in the US versus when we look at socialized medicine in other countries, right? So it's like, the reality is that there are some economies of scale and other things, right, that can be done when you're all operating under that same umbrella. But there's also some other things that present themselves as very different challenges as a result of that same experience. And so that I would say to me is the most glaring difference, because when we first look at the numbers, right, Contra Costa, it's amazing. And it still is. I'm not saying that it's not. It's impressive numbers. But there are some additional nuances that make those look as attractive as they do. I don't know that they're things, the things that make those numbers what they are. I don't know that those are things that can be easily replicated in another county, especially one as dynamic as San Diego. I saw a comment at LA too. Maybe what we could do is we'll pick on a few and see if we can display them in comparison based on the number of plans maybe they have and the total population. Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Those are some of the conversations that that we're starting to have, best practice models, and trying to figure out ways that we can share best practice in a way that it makes sense and can relate to other work for other, like is something a best practice because you're doing X, Y, and Z and I can replicate X, Y, and Z, or is it something that's best practice, which is really cool, but I have no capability of replicating it because the ecosystem, the regional ecosystem is so different. So just sort of putting that out there as a disclaimer, Joe, but absolutely, I would love to be able to just sort of bring more of that to San Diego, whether it's in Slack or maybe in an email newsletter. I'm trying to figure out a balance to where we have enough time to talk in these meetings, and I hate just talking at all of you. And I love the meetings where we can spend the most time in the breakout rooms and just talk about some of the things that are really happening in the community. So we'll work on that, Joe, and we'll try and bring it to you all in a way that makes sense. As we bring that information to you, Joe, I'll charge you with an actionable deliverable, and that maybe you could let me know when we start to do that if it's something that makes sense, if it is easy to digest, whether in the way that the material looks or in how we're sending that to the collaborative. Absolutely. I know that we're almost at time, right, Emily? We have about 10 minutes. So we won't be able to get into our breakouts, but I'm going to share some information with all of you in the couple of minutes that we have. So the first is for those that are staying on and going to the managed care office hours, if you need to take a mini break, feel free to do that. You'll have this deck. We also will have for you guys a calendar which will display all of the events for now to the end of the year. We'll come in and cancel events if they get canceled, or add events if they get added. So the idea behind this is that you don't have to sort of be in a month-to-month situation. If you're a planner or if you're incredibly busy, like many of you are, it gives you an opportunity to kind of look out a little bit further in the future. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're going to send you, if you're interested, is an idea behind some of the best practices that we're hearing from other facilitators, is that they're working with individual organizations on a individual organization level change. So similar methodology, right? We use QI and plan, study, do, act, which is really just do something. Look at what you've done, depending on the impact, make a change, and then act on that change, right? So like, you know, it's really just thinking about it in an individual or incremental way for those of you who aren't QI buffs. So the reality is that you all are working on all of this stuff individually within your own organization, and some other CPI facilitators are working one-on-one with organizations to help them through some of their things that they would like to work on for organization changes. So smaller scale individual organizations. And so we had planned to kind of tee up our breakout rooms a little differently today. In lieu of that, we'll send you some information about that in our follow-up email. If it's something that you're interested in, we're going to ask you a couple of questions so that we can follow up with you to work with you directly. We are not switching to just doing organizational level small scale changes. There are other CPIs that are doing that. And I just sort of want to acknowledge and say to you all, the biggest systems-wide changes happen slowly, but with everybody at the table talking about a system that needs to be looked at, modified, improved, addressed, engaged, approached differently. And we don't do that by staying within our own organization. Organizational level changes collectively impact a system, sure. But we don't want to lose some of the things that are happening at the grander scale, at the system and community level. And so that's not something, unless you all say you hate it, that we want to stand down. So this is really just another opportunity to offer assistance to each and every CPI participant. So we'll send some information on that as well. And we'll send that over in our follow-up email. Any reactions, comments, thoughts on that? Please definitely share. You're welcome to share here or with me directly as well. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. It's hard, I think, sometimes when you're in the thick of it, right? To say, you know, I always want to be doing more faster. I am a New Yorker through and through, and moving quickly and talking quickly in an animated fashion are most of my default characteristics. So, but it is hard because when you don't see like with anything, an immediate impact, it's harder to kind of push forward for the change. And so that's why we don't want to lose it in the absence of, you know, in addition to maybe working with you guys on an individual level. So, so thank you for that. And we'll continue to kind of move that forward as well. Okay. Sorry again that we didn't get to our breakouts. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot that we're losing in community share outs. So if you guys represent one of the share outs, if you all can, I know it's another thing and we can always work with you directly if you prefer. You know, if you have something to share with the rest of the CPI, we can work with you to get it on Slack. We can work with you to get it out via email. But when we add up 5 or 6 different community announcements and give each of you 5 minutes, you see where the time goes. So, so acknowledging that in order to try and keep us moving with our breakout groups, we'll try to do these via Slack, but we'll bug each and every one of you directly to see if we can get some additional information and start to kind of leverage that as a listserv. And then if it doesn't work, we'll figure out a way to bake it into to these monthly meetings or to the coffee chats. Or to another meeting. But if we have to stand up another meeting, I'm telling you, you all will be very mad at me. So we're about 4 minutes into our switch over to our office hours. Emily, could you go to the page that gives everybody instruction? One more. Aha. Okay. We have representatives from each of the managed care plans participating today. So thank you to those managed care plans who are in each of the breakout rooms. Emily should have you listed as a co-presenter in effort to facilitate that breakout room. And we have shared some of the questions with the managed care plans ahead of time. Some of the questions, all of the questions with the managed care plans ahead of time. Some of the questions that we saw are questions that we have answers to with our things that we've covered in Kelly Academy, et cetera. We will work with the managed care plans and with you all to send a follow-up FAQ. The last Lunch and Learn, we have an FAQ in draft. Once that's finalized, we'll send that. This will hopefully translate into FAQ number 2, and we'll share that with you all as well. So you'll click on that meeting control, you'll select the breakout room, and you'll see that it automatically defaults to unassigned. You're going to want to click on, see how there's 6 rooms versus participants. And some of you may see a laundry list of people. You may have to, there's a little triangle on the left-hand side. You may have to minimize that first one that says unassigned in order to see the breakout rooms. For the managed care plans on the line, we'll be here to support you. We'll be popping in and out of each of the rooms. If there's any issues technology-wise, you can also continue to reach Emily as the co-organizer through the chat. And we have some folks who are still unassigned. If you aren't participating in the office hours today, you are clear to go ahead and drop from our monthly meeting.